Encryption. A long campaign is now.
This is the car market in Mogadishu.
NATO's military success against
many Western nations.
This is On Assignment.
Hello and welcome to On Assignment, coming to you from VOA Studio 55 in Washington. I'm Imran Siddiqui, along with my co-host Alex Villarreal.
In this half hour, South Sudan, fighting forced them from their homes. Now they're suffering from flooding. VOA goes inside a camp for the displaced.
Then, it's a rare look at a detention center for immigrants and a group of volunteers helping to care for them.
Later, is Apple making it harder for police to tap into your phone?
And we bring you part 2 of our coverage of California's homeless.
Don't go away. On Assignment starts right now.
In South Sudan, tens of thousands fled to a United Nations base to escape violence in Unity State. Now they face another threat: floodwaters.
At the Bentiu protection site, aid workers have scrambled to help a population with nowhere else to turn. VOA East Africa correspondent Gabe Joslow got an inside look at the camp, and he tells us about the flooding that he witnessed.
A soggy marshland. This UN peacekeepers base was never meant for so many people. But today, 47,000 have crammed in to escape violence outside. Mostly from the Nuer tribe, they fled fighting between the mostly Nuer armed opposition and Dinka government forces which now control the city. Many are still too afraid to leave. At least here, there are markets and a sense of community. But living knee-deep in this polluted water makes this existence unsustainable.
Gabe, I want to talk first about the flooding at this camp for the displaced. I mean, it was pretty remarkable seeing your images. It looks very devastating. Describe for us the scene. You were in the floodwaters knee deep.
The conditions are just awful there. I mean, you've got almost 50,000 people living at this camp that was never meant to house anybody except for a small contingent of UN peacekeepers. So it's basically a soggy marshland even during the dry season, and now it's essentially a lake that people are living in. So just to go to the market or to go fetch firewood, people are having to walk through knee-high, sometimes waist-high water. And every morning they have to, bail out their homes to get the water out of the places that they're trying to sleep. It's just a constant battle. And, to call it water is actually kind of generous because it's overwhelmed all the latrines, so it's really a mixture of human waste and pollution and just some really nasty stuff.
Now, you had the chance to talk to a number of people who are living there. What did they tell you are the biggest challenges they're facing?
I mean, it's essentially just trying to survive in these awful conditions.
Sometimes we go without anything to eat. The place is filled with water, and the children cry from standing up all day with no place to sit down.
Nobody wants to stay in this area, and they wouldn't if they felt safe enough to go outside. So I think more than anything, people want to be able to return to their homes like in Bentiu town, but that was an area that was hotly contested between the South Sudanese government and rebel armed opposition forces. And until they feel like there's some kind of lasting peace, they're not really comfortable going anywhere. So they're going to brave these really terrible conditions instead of risking their lives outside.
So, Gabe, what's being done then to get these people out of these conditions?
Well, all of the aid agencies that are working there in Bentiu, which had been focused on longer projects such as health and education, they've all switched their focus and are really just trying to do one thing, which is drain the camps. So they are running pumps every day. Right now, they've got very small capacity pumps, but they're waiting for some larger equipment. And they're just hoping that once they clear out the water, they might be able to improve conditions a bit for the people living there.
Right, and let's talk more about the root of these displacements. Why is it that so many people have been forced from their homes?
Well, the fighting began last December, and it was a political dispute between the president and his former deputy. Now, over 10,000 people have been killed, so it's really just a nasty, nasty conflict. And unfortunately, there isn't really a lot of hope or a lot of positive signs that it's going to end soon.
And as always, thanks to Gabe, who is based in Kenya, but he brings us stories from all over the eastern side of the continent.
But here in the United States, some 34,000 undocumented immigrants are being held in detention centers. Many have fled violence in Central America and have family here, but they still face deportation.
VOA's Jerome Sokolovsky went to one of the country's largest detention centers where critics who want to see it closed are trying to help the detainees inside. Take a look.
Volunteer Beatriz Henao tries to lift the spirits of a Salvadoran detainee, telling him God never arrives late. Nilson Flores was caught at the border in May and brought to the Stewart Detention Center in Georgia, a facility for male detainees. Most of them are sent back to their countries despite conditions there.
They should call this place the jail of broken dreams.
Henao is a volunteer with El Refugio, the refuge in Spanish. The faith-based group works out of a house down the road in Lumpkin, Georgia.
Now, you were able to accompany volunteers to this center. What stands out to you about the time you spent with them there?
I think the motivation of these people to actually have a contact with the detainees was quite striking. From a moral and a religious perspective, they feel that they have to show hospitality to these strangers in their country. One of them told me, I almost feel like I have to go and say, I do not agree with this. I'm not part of this. I want to help you and do, what little I can.
I want to talk more about this for-profit aspect of the system. People who support that, why do they say that that's a good way to set up the system?
Right, well, the federal government says that this is a more tax-effective way of detaining these people, and that it gives them the flexibility to move people around. However, the opponents say that what ends up happening is that there's a profit incentive.
When your profit margin is dependent upon apprehending and incarcerating, and when you make more profit by cutting costs in their care, I feel that that's reprehensible.
The estimates I saw is that it costs about $150 a day to keep these people in detention. There are lots of hotels that I stay at when I'm traveling that don't cost that much.
It's interesting, Jerome, we don't often get a look inside these detention centers. How was it that you were able to go in and do this story?
I was a bit surprised that I was allowed in. Also, the people at El Refugio told me that it was very unusual for a reporter with a camera to be allowed in. I think one of the interesting things is I was promised an interview with this detainee one-on-one. But when I was there, I was told, for us to arrange that, we have to shut down the whole family visit system. I was accredited to go to this center, and the arrangements should have been made. There should have been a separate room for an interview with this guy. I'm not saying I'm not unhappy with the way it turned out, because in a way I think it's very realistic to see through the window. But doing TV, it makes it more difficult to tell his story, because you need shots of him doing other things to be able to talk about him. So
let's talk more about him and his story. What drove him to come to the U.S.?
I think it's a very interesting and moving and tragic story. His family left or fled El Salvador during the Civil War in I think around 1990, and he was a baby then, so he was left behind with relatives. Now there's another wave of violence in the country, and he's trying to leave and rejoin his parents, who he hasn't seen for 24 years. He's 25 years old. So he made the perilous journey through Mexico and was abandoned in the desert by a coyote, by a human smuggler. He said at one point, I was so exhausted, I just turned myself into the authorities.
What do you hope people who watch your piece take away from it?
I think the way this issue has been portrayed in this country has been pretty one-sided against these immigrants. So I didn't think it was such a bad thing to give the people who feel empathy with them more of a voice. I think this is a voice we don't hear so much in the debate in the U.S.
That debate should pick up again after the U.S. congressional elections in November. President Obama has said that is when he'll consider taking executive action on immigration.
We're taking a break now, but on the other side, that new Apple operating system Why is it a problem for law enforcement? You're watching On Assignment. It began as a software tweak by Apple to increase security on the devices running Apple's newest operating system, iOS 8. Now it has turned into a heated debate between the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation and high-tech corporations over how much personal information law enforcement agencies can demand to see. Apple says its new encryption protects users' iPhone privacy. The FBI says the policy puts important evidence off limits to investigators. Joining me right now is VOA web reporter Doug Bernard to talk about this. Thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here.
What's going on here?
So this happened fairly recently, back in September, when the new operating system was released, the system for mobile devices, so iPhones and iPads. There was this tweak which bolstered encryption. Now remember, encryption is the way that data on your phone is scrambled, so nobody can just pick it up and kind of start poking around, seeing everything that's in there. Well, with that tweak came a very important change. Because the encryption was stronger, Apple basically said, we will not be able to unlock these phones anymore. Now, in the past, if local law enforcement or the FBI had a valid warrant, Apple would unlock the phone and then the police could search it. Now, with this change, Apple says it's just not practical for them to do that anymore. So unless somebody voluntarily unlocks their phone, everything in there is basically off limits.
Is this a publicity stunt from Apple? Because you know, and a lot of us know, that FBI can get their hands on anything that they want.
Well, it sort of depends where you live, I guess. If you're here in the United States, it's true that the USA Patriot Act gives the FBI and local law enforcement wide latitude in terms of searching what you do online. They can subpoena information from your mobile phone company, your internet service provider, and you have to imagine that a great deal of the information on your phone came or went somewhere. So that's pretty much, they can still get at that kind of stuff. It could be, I suppose one could call it a PR stunt. One could also call it a marketing ploy, because a lot of Apple's customers are overseas. They're not subject to the USA Patriot Act, but of course we've all been reading about the Edward Snowden revelation, so people say they want better encryption standards.
And the FBI Director James Comey, he's saying that to get their job done, they need access to this data. So he's got a point.
He very much has a point, and it's rather unusual, I think, for an FBI director to come out so publicly and so strongly critical. He did this almost immediately after Apple announced the change, and he's kept up his attack. Just recently in Washington, at a speech, he referred to encryption taking us to, quote, a very, very dark place, and warned of potentially dire problems that could affect lots of people by this inability of law enforcement, they say, to unlock somebody's phone and see, look for what might be incriminating evidence.
And Apple's not alone in this. Google, that's providing the Android operating system, they're in this same situation.
That's right. Very shortly after Apple announced its change, Google announced a very similar change for the Android system as well.
Okay. Where do you think it's going to go, if you could tell us in 30 seconds?
It's fascinating because I think the U.S. Supreme Court really provided earlier this year a bit of a wind vane. This is not a group of people who are very highly advanced technologically, but they seem to understand clearly how sensitive mobile phones are, how much personal sensitive information is on there. They had two rulings that really knocked back law enforcement's ability to search. So I think we're going to keep seeing, in effect, this continued push for greater encryption and giving people more control over who can see what's on their phone.
If I put encryption on my phone, no one can read my messages?
Yes, as long as you remember your passcode. Now, depending on the encryption you use, if you forget your passcode, if you've got strong encryption, nobody's ever going to be able to unlock it.
All right, fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
VOA web reporter Doug Bernard. We're taking another break. Still to come, a California artist puts his skills to work to benefit the homeless. You're watching On Assignment.
All right, so last week we told you about a special bus in California providing showers to the homeless, but what about their need for shelter?
Yeah, that's where artist Greg Klein comes in. The small enclosures he builds serve as portable homes for the homeless. I spoke to Michael Sullivan, VOA correspondent, about that.
This industrial section of West Oakland is dotted with tiny houses designed and built by a local artist. Greg Klein has built and given away at least 20 of these structures.
I like to help them, sure. I mean, it's fun for me. I like to make things, and to do something that makes a big impact in someone's life is good.
How did Greg come up with this idea of building homes for the homeless in his community?
Well, you know, in about 2005, Greg moved into this area of West Oakland, which is an industrial area. It's the port area. It's the area where the writer Jack London lived and worked in a cannery area 100 years ago. It's a kind of a rough area, a lot of small factories, a lot of freeway overpasses. He moved in there to create an artist studio because the land was very cheap. But he noticed there were a lot of homeless people who would settle in the area as well. And he said one day, one of the homeless people came up to him, it was raining, and asked if he could help provide shelter. Oscar Young got a home and relief from chilly nights on the street.
Well, it's better than living on the ground, to tell you the truth, because if it wasn't for Greg, I would be still on the ground.
He happened to be experimenting with building small structures. His initial thought was that he could build a small structure just using discarded materials and perhaps sell these. But he had one sitting outside his studio, and he thought, well, I'll let this homeless person sleep in this, and eventually he gave it away. And then he started building one after another. And he's built something like 20 of these structures so far. They are on wheels. They're theoretically portable, although people generally try to find a place, set them up, and basically you just move in. Some on the streets once had houses of their own, but Sheila Williams has learned to live with less.
I had it all just like you people do out there. But now look at me now. I'm living in one of Greg's houses, and I'm thankful to that man.
So this is a place that they can lock up, they can keep things safe, they can be secure themselves at night, and they can be sheltered from the elements when the weather gets bad. And it really makes all the difference. It just gives them a sense of belonging and a sense that they have a place to call home.
One of the interesting things in your piece, in this particular piece, was how Greg is providing power supply to these homes.
That's right, and every one of these homes is a little bit different, but basically he goes out on the street and he finds discarded materials.
I put it on light, you know, an old lamp, so you could move it around. You can keep it optimum just to the sun.
Empty coffee bags become shingles, and a washing machine door and refrigerator shelf become windows. And this area of West Oakland is, because it's abandoned at night, and you know, the factory's closed down, there aren't many people, there's a lot of illegal dumping. And people who don't want to pay money to dispose of their materials at the local dump will come out and just dump things on the street. Well, normally the city has to go in and clean this up in the morning, but Greg goes out early some mornings and just sees what he can find. He finds pieces of lumber, you know, wood, discarded refrigerators, doors, discarded campers, all kinds of material, and he puts this together. He goes out to some hardware stores and he buys a few things himself, just some inexpensive wheels or maybe you know, some nails and screws and glue. But other than that, he is using discarded materials.
Does he need any kind of permit for this? The city has no objection to what he's doing.
Well, you know, theoretically you cannot just create a home and set it on the sidewalk, but the police, I asked the homeless people, have you had problems from the police, which is generally a big problem with homeless people, and they say no. And I think what some of the homeless people are hoping, and what Greg Klein is hoping, is maybe, you know, the city could come up with some vacant land or some areas where these things are fully legal and could even be permitted. But as it is now, they haven't had a problem in these areas.
And thanks to Michael Sullivan for that. If you saw the 2007 film The Last King of Scotland, you know all about the acting talent of Academy Award winner Forrest Whitaker.
But what you might not know is that Whitaker is also an advocate for peace and reconciliation around the world. Not only is Whitaker the United Nations Scientific, Educational, and Cultural Organization's special envoy devoted to the cause, but he also started his own nonprofit to help communities in conflict. He told all to VOA's Penelope Pulu. Check it out.
In my heart, I am a simple man like you.
Forrest Whitaker won an Oscar in 2007 for his portrayal of former Ugandan dictator Idi Amin. While filming in Uganda, Whitaker got to see a country ravaged by civil war. It was not the first time he had witnessed the toll of violence.
I think the first time I really tried to deal with it was when my cousin, who really was my roommate, who went off to war to Vietnam, and when he came back, he was a different person.
The rise of gangs in America affected his personal life, preventing him from attending some schools because they were in dangerous areas. Uganda was where he first decided to take action.
I ended up starting to work with child soldiers in the north of Uganda. And it was there that I realized the parallels of the stories and the parallels of the emotions of the kids I knew back home and the kids I had met here and the people and their hearts.
In 2012, he founded the Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative to foster growth and reconciliation in disadvantaged communities. Working with international organizations and experts, his organization promotes literacy in northern Uganda, South Sudan, and Mexico. Whitaker says the effort starts with education. Once people learn a vocation and other life skills, they are not as prone to violence because they are invested in something constructive.
Which means the yellow price was?
In South Sudan, where a deadly civil war is raging, his initiative is building 9 computer centers.
It's a chain reaction of what we're doing by training the trainers and them training the community.
In Tijuana, Mexico, Whitaker's initiative helps young people escape a life of drugs.
If there were kings as a gang member or a drug dealer, they would be, if they had the opportunity, they would probably be a king in economics or in a store or in, in the university.
In northern Uganda, ex-child soldiers are learning trauma relief methods.
They may be enforced, even when they join, to commit certain atrocities so that they would sever any tie with where they came from. Because of the shame, they can't go back. And also because of maybe that atrocity could have been involving like the destruction of their own family.
The acclaimed actor keeps a very busy schedule. He personally visits these areas every few months to oversee the projects.
I'll continue to do some artistic work over the next years, but ultimately this is what I'll be doing. I think this is what I was supposed to do. It occupies most of my time.
Do you like it? Yes.
But I'm fortunate to meet some.
That's why the mission.
Penelope Pulu, VOA News, Washington.
Whitaker, of course, joins other celebrities in contributing to international causes. Actress Angelina Jolie is a United Nations Special Envoy for Refugees, and Leonardo DiCaprio was named a UN Envoy on climate change in September.
That he was, and that does it for our show this week. Be sure to join us next time for a look at the challenges Afghanistan's female journalists face.
And remember, you can find all of our episodes on voanews.com by selecting On Assignment under the Programs tab, and we're also on Facebook and YouTube.
From all of us here at On Assignment, goodbye from Washington, and check us out next week.